Welcome to today's Explainer. We're going to be diving into the truly incredible chronological journey of Akbar. I mean, we're talking about a guy who transformed from a literally abandoned toddler into the architect of a 200-year empire. This whole story is just a wild mix of survival, betrayal, and honestly, absolute political genius.
So, we're going to track his life step by step. We'll start with his early days as the abandoned prince, move into his time as a puppet boy king, see how he eventually seized absolute control, break down his military reforms, look at his Rajput strategy, and finally, uncover the reality behind Din-e-Ilahi.
All right, part 1, The Abandoned Prince, a childhood of constant peril.
To understand Akbar, you have to understand how insanely high the stakes were from day one. His father, Emperor Humayun, had just suffered a crushing defeat and was literally chased out of his own empire. So Akbar's born into exile while they're on the run in Sindh. And it gets worse. Caught in these freezing snowstorms, Humayun realizes his one-year-old son simply cannot survive the brutal trek to Iran. So he makes this agonizing choice to leave baby Akbar behind in the camp. Humayun's crew was so impoverished at this point, his 40 remaining men had to cook and eat their own horses in their helmets just to survive the journey. He does eventually secure 14,000 soldiers from the king of Iran, but when he comes back to conquer Kabul, his own brother, Kamran, does the unthinkable. By the time Akbar is 4, his treacherous uncle Kamran literally dangles the toddler off the outer wall of the fort. He used him as a human shield to stop Humayun's massive Iranian army from firing their arrows.
It is a total cinematic miracle that he survived. Humayun's soldiers realized, wait, that's the prince crying on the wall, so they immediately held their fire, stormed the fort, and finally rescued him. You can imagine how a brutal upbringing like that forged an absolute survivor's mindset in young Akbar. It paved the way for his reunion with his mother and eventually allowed Humayun to retake the throne in Delhi 15 years later, with the help of his fiercely loyal general Bahram Khan.
That brings us to part 2, the puppet boy king, reigning in name only. Because what's really fascinating here is how quickly Akbar gets thrust into power, but with almost zero actual control.
So, Humayun makes this triumphant return to power, right? But it only lasts 7 months. He had become a deeply reflective guy, and one day, upon hearing the azan, the call to prayer, he bows in reverence, accidentally slips down the stairs, and tragically dies. At that exact moment, young Akbar is actually away on a military campaign. His general Bahram Khan doesn't even wait. He immediately crowns the 14-year-old boy right there on the battlefield. For the next 5 years, Bahram Khan acts as the regent. He's practically running the entire empire and crushing their enemies. But back in the palace, Akbar's foster mother, Maham Anga, the woman who had raised him since he was abandoned in Kabul, starts whispering these poisoned rumors. She starts claiming Bahram Khan is only appointing his own loyalists to the top military positions.
And by the time Akbar hits age 19, that manipulation actually works. Bahram Khan makes a fatal mistake by accidentally killing a royal servant, and Akbar forces the man he affectionately called Khan Baba into retirement, packing him off to perform Hajj. But here is the massive irony of the whole situation. By trying to take control and removing Bahram Khan, Akbar inadvertently hands total, absolute control of the Mughal Empire straight over to Maham Anga and her wildly ambitious son, Adham Khan. Akbar is essentially reduced to a king in name only.
Which leads into part 3, seizing absolute control, the fall of Adham Khan.
So Maham Anga's son, Adham Khan, gets sent to conquer Malwa. But instead of remaining loyal to Akbar, he successfully takes the territory and just immediately rebels. Akbar is having none of it. He personally marches an immense army to Malwa, captures Adham, and drags him all the way back to the palace. When Adham Khan continues his treacherous behavior, Akbar delivers this totally brutal, dramatic execution order. He says, throw him off the highest roof of the palace. If he doesn't die, drag him back up and throw him again. And they did. They threw him off the roof. The first fall didn't kill him, so they dragged him back up and threw him again until it did. The sheer shock of this actually caused Maham Anga to die of grief shortly after. And just like that, the young king finally takes true, unshared control of his throne.
Moving on to part 4, reforming the military, bureaucracy over bloodlines.
Now that the puppet strings are cut, Akbar immediately sets out to make sure no single general can ever overpower or manipulate him again. To do this, he comes up with the ingenious Mansabdari system. He completely eliminates the role of a single army chief. Instead, he divides the military into specific ranks, where a commander oversees anywhere from 10 to 7,000 men based purely on merit. No nepotism allowed whatsoever.
To stop commanders from building their own little personal kingdoms, he constantly transfers them to different regions. And here's the real kicker. Soldiers are paid their salaries directly by the government, not by their commanding officers. That effectively destroyed the ability of generals to buy personal loyalty. And to really crush corruption, he institutes two brilliant systems inspired by an earlier ruler, allowed in Khalji. First, the Chera system, which required a detailed written facial description of every single soldier to stop identity fraud, which was super rampant at the time. Second, the dog system. This meant every horse was branded with a unique mark, functioning exactly like modern car license plates. You combine that with a highly inclusive recruitment policy that brought in people from all castes and religions, and Akbar basically built a massive, centralized, unstoppable military machine. Nobody was above the law, not even his own stepbrother.
Now for Part 5, the Rajput Strategy, turning enemies into allies.
See, with the Rajputs, surrender just was not an option. If defeat looked inevitable, the women would perform jauhar, stepping into massive fires, while the men performed saka, charging to the death in a final suicidal attack. Knowing they would fight to the absolute bitter end, Akbar realized that endless warfare would just bleed his own empire dry. Raw power wasn't going to cut it here. He needed a political masterpiece.
So Akbar uses this masterful blend of diplomacy and force. Years earlier, a Rajput named Raja Barmal had helped a Mughal commander. Later, when Barmal is visiting Akbar's court, Akbar is trying to tame a wild elephant. The beast goes completely rogue, everyone panics and flees, but Barmal and his family actually stand their ground to protect the emperor. Akbar is deeply impressed by that loyalty and bravery. He allies with him, eventually marrying his daughter Jothabai. And crucially, Akbar allows her total religious freedom in the palace, and he makes Rajput, like Mansingh, top generals, letting them maintain their status as regional kings. But for those who absolutely refuse diplomacy, like Maharana Pratap, who insulted Akbar's envoy, Akbar did not hesitate to use that massive military to defeat them.
By turning his greatest enemies into his greatest allies, Akbar achieved total internal stability. And this is such a timeless lesson in governance, right? True internal stability gives leaders the political capital they need to push through controversial social reforms. Because he had that control, he was able to abolish the enslavement of prisoners of war. He directly attacked deep-rooted social stigmas by banning the forced practice of sati, where widows were expected to burn on their husbands' funeral pyres, and legally encouraged them to remarry instead. Through sweeping changes like these, the Mughal Empire reached unprecedented peaks of power.
And finally, Part 6, the Deen-e-Ilahi reality, religion or political strategy.
So the state is physically secure, but internally it's religiously fractured. People are fighting tooth and nail over the smallest theological differences. To solve this, Akbar builds the Ibadat Khana, a house of debate. Now, initially he just invites Muslim scholars, but it devolves so quickly into bitter infighting. Clerics are literally issuing fatwas declaring each other infidels. Akbar gets so deeply frustrated by this that he takes a truly incredible step. He fires the empire's chief imam, removes the top judge so he can become chief justice himself, and throws the doors open to scholars of absolutely every faith so he can learn from all of them.
Now, this era is surrounded by sheer historical misinformation. Those disgruntled clerics that Akbar fired, they started spreading wild, malicious rumors. They claimed Akbar was turning mosques into horse stables, that he banned the Azan and Hajj, and was forcing men to shave their beards. But the reality of his new system, Deen-e-Ilahi, was totally different. It was essentially a voluntary philosophical code aimed at uniting the empire's elite. It only ever had about 18 or 19 actual followers. Even some of his own top ministers flat out refused to join, and Akbar never punished them for it.
Instead of the extreme bans all those rumors claimed, the actual tenets of Deen-e-Ilahi were highly philosophical and really peaceful. Followers were asked to use specific greetings, to host feasts and give to charity while they were still alive rather than leaving it for after death, and above all, to respect all religions equally. Akbar's core belief became that while God is one, the paths to reach him are entirely different for everyone.
Akbar ruled with these complex, layered strategies for exactly 50 years, half a century. He pulled an empire from the absolute brink of total destruction and established an administrative, military, and diplomatic system so incredibly robust that it laid the unshakable groundwork for the Mughal Empire to thrive for the next 2 centuries.
Which brings us to the ultimate question of his reign. Was Deen-e-Ilahi just the vanity project of a man who thought he was a prophet? Or was it actually a brilliant, pragmatic political tool designed to glue a massive, diverse population together? I'll leave you with that final thought to ponder about Akbar's complex legacy.
Thank you so much for joining